Diwata is more than just a creature of Filipino folklore or a Sam Concepcion song. It's also the name of the Philippines' first microsatellite. So come and join us as we learn about another Diwatang kay ganda. I'm your host, Francesca Palabrica, and this is Sirkit Rikit. We are here today with engineer Leur Labrador from PhilSA to tell us a little bit about the Diwata. So, engineer, thank you so much for being here today.
Glad to be here.
Engineer, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm Leur Labrador. I'm the current Chief Science Research Specialist under PhilSA of the Spacecraft Mechanical and Autonomous Systems Development Division. Quite a long title, really, but anything that's related to the mechanical side and anything that works on its own, the autonomous aspect of spacecraft, satellites, kami yung division concerned on those matters.
So, engineer, I hear you're behind the Diwata project.
Yes, I was part of the team that was sent to build Diwata 1 as well as Diwata 2. So, Diwata 1 was way back in 2015. We were a team of 4 engineers from the university. May 2 engineers from DOST-ASTI and may sumunod na 3 engineers who worked on the payload side. So we were a team of 9.
How was the Diwata 1 and Diwata 2 project for you?
It was fun because I had a team of engineers working with me. I learned a lot. I won't say I'm the best engineer in the group. And so, I enjoyed that role. I tried to learn from my teammates. By the way, we were doing our masters while building the satellite. So, may on-the-side na masters. Minsan, sinasabi ko on-the-side yung satellite. But, looking back, really, we were sent there to build the satellite. So, kahit hindi namin matapos yung masters, basta ma-launch yung satellite, that's the most important thing. Now, the thing with building satellites is you have a definite deadline. Kasi, for small satellites such as Diwata 1, Diwata 2, when they get launched into orbit, hindi sila yung may nasakay. Kumbaga, kung sa sasakyan, may shotgun passengers, si Diwata 1 and other small satellites, mga angkas lang sila. Yun yung tinatawag nating rideshare model. The thing behind that is it's cheaper and we get the chance to ride alongside bigger satellites para lang ma-launch yung ating ginawang spacecraft. You need to follow a strict schedule. Pag sinabi nilang this day, you need to finish it, you need to bring it here, dapat tapos. And the other thing is that during my student life, I think everyone na estudyante, sanay tayo na okay lang yan, deadline na, pass your papers, yun na yun eh. But it's really not the case for satellites because once you deliver it, you need to be sure, very sure, nagagana siya kasi hindi mo na mare-repair once it's in orbit. And my core memory was during the launch of Diwata 1, it was released from the International Space Station. No? We were overlooking a control room sa JAXA that was in Japan. Tapos may Japanese mission control leader na nag-countdown. And an official from DOST had this big red button to click. Sasabihin niya, Diwata 1, go! Then click, and then lalabas. May live feed from the International Space Station na lalabas si Diwata 1. Di namin alam ano mangyayari. This is Diwata 1, no? So, itong railing na yan lang yung nakakabit. These 4 parts, yun yung nakakabit dun sa deployer. We were praying. Our hands were clasped in a praying gesture na hindi maghiwa-hiwalay during launch. And when it came out, it was really a majestic sight. The satellite in one piece and looks fine, at least from the optics. And so the next step was, sige, na-release na. It will take about an hour or so before the satellite gets activated. That's the design. Kasi may mga tao dun sa International Space Station and you don't want them to be affected by radiation and things like that. So we had to rush back from JAXA office back to our ground station, which was an overnight bus ride away. We were very tense, hoping that everything works. And in the morning, maybe 9 to 10 a.m., that was the scheduled first contact with Diwata 1. And I remember distinctly, walang nagsasalita sa room. Our Japanese professors were there, the entire team was there. Until we saw some signs of life. May first signals, telemetry, we're receiving it. It shows that Diwata 1 is healthy. And really, a very heavy burden was lifted from our shoulders. All the hard work, the sleepless nights paid off, and it was all worth it in the end.
So you mentioned po a Diwata 1 and a Diwata 2. So what's the main difference between the Diwata 1 and Diwata 2?
Right, that's a good question. No? Diwata 1 was launched or released from the International Space Station. It follows a circular orbit. Ang circular orbit, to speak in simple terms, wala siyang definite return time. Although you can schedule it, maybe see it 3 days in advance, beforehand. You can predict na dadaan siya sa Philippines during these following periods. Hindi natin ma-predict in a long time kung ano yung magiging interaction niya with our ground stations. And so, the reason why we launched Diwata 1 in that orbit is because yun yung available orbit during that time. That was the easiest path for us to see it in space. Si Diwata 2 was launched in a sun-synchronous orbit. So, si sun-synchronous orbit, I would say mas thought out yung design kung saan siya ilo-launch, yung orbital parameters, such that it will have a regular revisit time over the Philippines. So, si Diwata 2 was designed to pass by the Philippines every 10:30 a.m. every day for 10 minutes. So, it will capture images and sometimes dalawang beses. So, 10:30 and 90 minutes later, that's around 12 o'clock in yung next pass niya. And the same thing happens at night time. So, around 10:30 p.m. to midnight, magpapass by the Philippines ulit siya. And that's the time we download the pictures captured during the morning. So, that's one difference, the orbit type of Diwata 1 and Diwata 2. The other difference is that may mga learnings. Lumakas yung loob natin dun sa Diwata 1. It worked. Everything was working fine. And we were able to fit in a couple of components, sinakay natin kay Diwata 2, that were developed almost locally, entirely. So, in Diwata 1, yung mga components niya were made in Japan, developed in Japan. Of course, with the designers coming from the Philippines, kami yon, yung engineers. Pero itong si Diwata 2, may separate team na gumawa ng modules. So, nandun si amateur radio unit, which I think is very special because it allows us to communicate using ham radio or amateur radio for ham radio enthusiasts. To communicate, for example, may lugar na natamaan ng typhoon, down yung conventional telecommunication lines, pwede nilang gamitin whenever Diwata 2 passes by ham radio to update on their situation, to make requests for rescue, things like that. Yung mga critical na information na kailangan nilang paratingin na hindi nila maparating because the traditional means are down. Another payload that we were able to mount dito sa Diwata 2 is yung attitude determination unit. Attitude, it's not attitude na misbehaving, not that kind of attitude. It's a jargon used for describing the spacecraft's orientation. So, saan siya nakaturo? That's what attitude refers to. So, nasa taas niyan is a set of sensors. I think there are around 6 that will know specifically nasan yung sun. So, when you know where the sun is, you can derive, and when you know also the magnetic field of the Earth, you can derive saan nakaturo yung satellite mo. And so that was also a very useful technology for us that we have demonstrated in Diwata 2.
What are the applications of the Diwata satellites? So why are we making them and why is it so important to have these satellites?
That's a good question. No? Let's go back a little bit. The entire PHL or Philippine Microsat project, it was inspired sadly by the events that transpired during Typhoon Yolanda. If you can remember, that was the most vicious typhoon ever recorded, I think, in our history, even going back a long time, no? And so during that time, down yung communication lines, the eastern part of the Philippines was severely affected, and we needed to procure satellite images from commercial companies. And so, during that time, when they were procuring it, they realized, teka, ang mahal pala. For 30 minutes to an hour of usage of their satellites so that we can take control of it and take pictures of the affected areas, millions of pesos yung rate. They thought, why not just build our own? Of course, it will take a long time probably for us to get there to that point wherein our images will be worth millions of pesos, but we have the manpower, and if we train the manpower and build facilities in the Philippines that will enable us to sustain those kinds of efforts to build our own satellites, then that would be great. Might as well start. That really started the development of Diwata 1 and Diwata 2. So nakabundle sila. In the PHL Microsat project, 2 microsatellites were going to be built. Their primary application is for Earth observation. So that means anything taking pictures of the Earth, and yung pictures na yon you can use for agriculture, for assessing the damages during disaster, fisheries even. If we fix the wavelength or yung nakikita ng cameras natin such that they can see yung mga hindi natin nakikita. So parang may supervision sila, kumbaga. So nakikita nila ano yung area ng crops, ano yung health ng crops even. We can determine, possibly predict the yield of crops in the future given yung itsura nila currently, and also partly weather, although that's another domain because Diwata 1 and Diwata 2 are low Earth orbit satellites, so hindi ganon kalawak.
So what do you see in the future for satellites?
I see an exciting future here in the Philippines. For one, we already have the Philippine Space Agency. Before, when we were still working in the project, we were funded by DOST. Don't get me wrong, I'm really thankful to DOST for that. Without them, PhilSA wouldn't be here. But we felt like we were just a small group doing satellites and trying to make things work. Now, when PhilSA came in, everyone's there. All the bases have been covered. So may gumagawa ng satellites, may nagwo-work on the space policy. If there's a space junk that comes to the Philippines, sino yung may-ari nun, who will be liable? So PhilSA has a division for that. National security is also a topic that is being handled by PhilSA. For example, if we need images of a certain area that concerns our national sovereignty, then PhilSA has a division will handle it. Even business development, PhilSA can't really sustain its current activity all by itself. Ever since funding from the government has covered our space technology activities. But for us to go far in the future, I think we need companies to come in, to step in, especially the private sector. And that's also something that we're working on. I'm excited to see the first ever startup. I think there are a few startups here in the Philippines doing space technology, but I'm excited for that very first startup na mag-launch ng satellite, operate it, and derive value from the data it produces. So I'm looking forward to that day. And the role of PhilSA to support those kinds of activities and enable that is to have an environment na maging conducive yung mga ganong types of endeavors. So one main component is yung mga test facilities. PhilSA is planning, working hard on establishing test facilities so we can ensure na yung satellites na dadalhin in outer space is gagana. And one of those facilities, we actually have it right here, malapit in this building. Yun yung full anechoic chamber. So what it does is medyo mahaba eh. Maybe it's better if I just show it to you. So, nandito tayo ngayon inside an anechoic chamber. Anechoic because it means literally without an echo. So, kung napapansin nyo, yung mga triangles na yan, they are foam materials with yung black is a special material that absorbs electromagnetic signals. So, what you can do inside this room is place something there. Itong poste na yan. Kapag naglagay ka dyan ng antenna, for example, or even an entire satellite, pwede siyang umikot. So you can measure the performance of the antenna, especially yung na-emit niyang electromagnetic signals, no, as it turns around. And this post right here, maglalagay tayo dyan ng isa pang antenna to receive yung signals na ine-emit dun sa kabila. So by doing that, we can characterize the signals coming from an antenna, a device under test, or if we want to, even an entire satellite in here. So this is one of the facilities that we have worked on, established so that future satellite makers can do it here locally in the Philippines. In the past, you needed to go to neighboring countries, but we have it now here and it's available for use.
That was so informative and so interesting. Thank you so much, engineer, for taking the
You're
time
welcome.
to impart your knowledge with us. And thank you, our dear viewers, for sticking around this long. Once again, I'm Francesca Palabrica.
I'm Leur Labrador.
And this is Sirkit, Rikit.